I was standing in a bridal fitting room with a white veil in my hands when my mother told me she and my father would not be coming to my wedding. She did not sound sorry. She did not hesitate. She did not even lower her voice. June 15th works better for Clarissa's birthday dinner, she said, like she was explaining a change in dinner reservations instead of breaking her oldest daughter's heart. Brad already invited people. We can't miss it. For a second, I honestly thought I had heard her wrong. My wedding was on June 15th. My sister's actual birthday was June 17th. But somehow, in my family, facts had never mattered as much as Clarissa's convenience. I looked at myself in the mirror then. Ivory silk, bare shoulders, veil pinned too loosely by a nervous consultant who had stepped back the moment my face changed. I remember thinking I looked like a woman in the middle of someone else's life. "Mom," I said, and my voice came out calmer than I felt. "You're choosing her birthday party over my wedding?" "Athena, don't make this dramatic," she replied. "You know how important this is for your sister. Your sister. Not for us. Not for the family. Not even for Clarissa, and you both. Just your sister." I do not remember everything else she said. I remember the tone more than the words. That flat certainty. That lifelong assumption that I would absorb the hurt quietly, make room for it, and keep loving them anyway. When the call ended, I stood there holding my breath like if I inhaled too deeply, I might shatter. The consultant asked if I needed a minute. I said no. That was the strange part. I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I didn't beg my mother to reconsider. Something in me had gone still in a way that felt unfamiliar, but not fragile. It felt final. Because the truth was, that 47-second call did not destroy my faith in my family. It revealed I had been building that faith alone. And before I tell you what I did that night, you need to understand something first. My parents did not suddenly choose my sister over me. They had been choosing her for 32 years. Growing up in Portland, Oregon, I always knew the hierarchy in our house. Clarissa got the sunny bedroom overlooking the backyard. I got the small room next to the garage, where the hum of the water heater was my lullaby every night. Mom introduced us differently, every single time. "This is Clarissa, my daughter," she'd say, hand on her shoulder. "And this is Athena, Clarissa's older sister," almost as if my own existence depended on my position relative to her. By 14, I had a part-time job at a bakery, paying for my own school supplies and stretching every dollar I earned until it screamed. Clarissa? New clothes, new phone, every wish fulfilled. The unfairness stung, but I told myself it was normal. It wasn't love that was missing, it was equality. When I turned 16, I bought a used Toyota Corolla after 6 months of saving. Dent in the bumper, air conditioning that worked only when it felt like it. I was proud. Every early morning spent frosting cupcakes for strangers. Every birthday I missed with friends. Every shift that tested my patience, it all led to that car. It was mine, and I earned it. 2 years later, Clarissa graduated high school. Mom and Dad surprised her with a brand new Mazda 3. Cherry red, leather seats. "She worked so hard," Mom said when she caught me staring. Clarissa had a 2.8 gigapascals. I graduated with a 3.7 while working 20 hours a week. Love, in my family, always came with a price tag. I was paying it. By 24, after community college and a full-time cooking job, I finally had a steady paycheck. But then, the first emergency call came. Dad lost his job. The mortgage was due. $3,000. I didn't have it, not really, but I had a credit card I'd been saving for emergencies. I maxed it out that day. Ramen became my main course for 3 months. I worked extra shifts until my feet ached, my hands cracked. Meanwhile, my parents posted weekend dinners, and Clarissa uploaded selfies from spa days. Family helps family, I told myself. The first emergency was just the opening act of 8 years where I was the only one paying the tickets. If this feels familiar, you're not alone. Subscribe and stand for dignity. Sometimes just hearing someone else say it aloud reminds you you don't have to carry it alone. Marcus noticed something about me 3 months into dating. "Athena, why do you transfer so much money to your parents every month?" His tone was curious, gentle. No judgment. For the first time, someone asked why I was giving until I had nothing left, and it didn't feel wrong to stop and think. That night we built a spreadsheet tracking every dollar, every date, every reason. By the time we were done, I realized I had spent more than $247,000 over 8 years. The realization hit me like a punch, but for the first time, I wasn't ashamed. I was awake. By the time I was 29, I had saved enough to take the leap I'd been dreaming of since I was 16, opening my own bakery, Sweet Dawn. The name came to me in a dream, illuminated by the golden morning light of my grandmother's kitchen, the smell of cinnamon and butter lingering in the air. I told my mother about it. She laughed. A bakery? Athena? Be realistic. You have a stable job, why throw it away? Clarissa added from the couch, not even looking up from her phone. Cupcakes for a living? That's so quaint. My father stayed silent, his quietness carrying the weight of disinterest rather than support. But I kept saving. Some dreams were too important to let others kill them. I poured every extra hour, every penny, into making that future real. Then the first big test came again. Clarissa got engaged, and within months, Mom called asking for my contribution to the wedding fund. $15,000. My bakery fund, gone in a single transfer. I wanted to say no, every fiber of me screamed it, but Mom's voice broke into that weaponized sobbing she always used, loud, dramatic, designed to make me feel guilty. I gave in. I sent the money. Because 8 years of conditioning had taught me that saying no would be selfish. Saying yes, even at the expense of my dream, was love. Or so I thought. Marcus watched silently as I carried the weight of their demands. He didn't scold. He didn't lecture. He just held my hand in quiet solidarity, reminding me that love could be a choice, not an obligation. His calm presence reminded me that some families show up because they care, not because you paid for it. 6 months later, when the bakery's lease was signed and the ovens finally ready, I realized I was stretched so thin that I could feel myself fraying at the edges. I was still sending $2,500 every month to the people who should have been there for me, even as I scrimped to pay deposits, first month's rent, and order ingredients for opening day. And yet, for the first time, I felt a spark of agency. I was doing this not because anyone demanded it, but because I finally understood that my life, my choices, and my dream were mine to protect. If you've ever been trapped between duty and self, you understand that tension. Subscribe for strength, because sometimes recognizing your own boundaries is the bravest step you can take. That spring, my grandmother's garden, the one where I had learned to knead cinnamon rolls until my arms burned, was sold. But Marcus arranged for us to see it again. Rosemary and lavender still grew wild. Standing there, ring in hand, he asked me to marry him, using the sapphire from my grandmother's locket. It was a moment of absolute clarity. I had people who loved me for who I was, not for what I could give them. The choice was mine, and this time, it was the right one. The months leading up to my wedding were filled with excitement and a quiet tension I couldn't shake. Every detail of Sweet Dawn Bakery's opening was taking shape, but at home, my parents loomed like shadows I couldn't avoid. I tried to ignore them, to focus on Marcus and our life together. But the patterns of my childhood didn't let me rest. I sent out my save the dates with trembling hands. Simple cream cardstock, pressed lavender from Helen's garden. Marcus beside me as I addressed each envelope. I hoped that seeing the invitation in person would spark even a flicker of excitement. But when I handed it to my mother, she barely glanced at it. "Let me check the calendar," she said, scrolling through her phone. Close to Clarissa's birthday, we might have plans. Plans. For my wedding. My own wedding. I wanted to ask what was more important, being there for me, or keeping up appearances for her daughter. But the words caught in my throat. I had spent 32 years learning not to expect anything from them. Clarissa wandered in from the kitchen. "Oh, your wedding thing. Brad wants to go to Cabo that weekend. I'll try to make it, but no promises." Her casual shrug cut sharper than any argument could. I drove home that evening, Marcus quietly beside me. "They didn't commit?" I asked, my voice hollow. "Maybe it's time to accept that your family isn't capable of being what you need them to be," he said gently. I didn't want to hear it. I refused to believe that the people who had given me life could choose, so openly, to minimize it. I wanted them there, even if it killed me to keep hoping. The truth is, by the time the final fitting arrived, I was exhausted, not physically, but emotionally. The ivory silk gown felt heavy, and not from the fabric. I held the veil in my hands, listening to the consultant fuss over the hem, and my phone buzzed. My mother. "Hi, Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I need to tell you something," she said, tone flat, detached. "Your father and I won't be able to make it to the wedding." The world stopped. I pressed the phone harder against my ear, staring at my reflection. 32 years of trying, of giving, of hoping, and it all condensed into 47 seconds. No explanation, no apology, just a choice that reaffirmed everything I had always feared. I didn't cry, I didn't argue, I hung up, and for the first time I realized something I should have known years ago. I wasn't a daughter to them. I was a resource, a bank, a tool to be used when convenient. I stepped out of the fitting room, paid the balance, and walked into the sunlight like nothing had happened. Because in that moment, I understood one simple truth. It wasn't about losing them. It was about finally, fully choosing myself. If you know what it's like to be invisible in your own family, subscribe and stand for dignity. Sometimes standing still is the bravest act. That night, I sat at the kitchen table, phone in one hand, Marcus watching silently from the doorway. My recurring transfer to my parents $2,500 every month, faithfully sent for 8 years, stared back at me on the banking app. $247,500. 8 years. Every emergency, every last-minute request, every guilt-laden sob I had absorbed, all of it. I knew what I had to do. Marcus didn't rush me. He simply said, "You don't have to decide tonight." But I did. If I waited, I knew I'd talk myself out of it. I'd imagine the apology calls, the tears, the possibility that maybe they'd change. I pressed cancel. Confirmed. The recurring transfer disappeared. Just like that, the invisible leash holding me to a lifetime of guilt snapped. I didn't text, I didn't call, no explanation, no argument, just freedom. When I told Marcus, he didn't cheer or congratulate. He just nodded. "This is you taking care of your family," he said. And I realized that for the first time in years, my family meant Marcus, me, and anyone who actually showed up. 2 weeks later, my mother called. I was frosting a 3-tier anniversary cake at Sweet Dawn Bakery when her name lit up my phone. My first instinct was to ignore it, but curiosity, or maybe a small streak of masochism, made me answer. "Athena, there must be some mistake," she said. I knew immediately what she meant. There was no mistake. "I stopped the transfers," I said calmly. "I'm not sending money anymore." There was silence. I pictured her standing in the kitchen, frozen, trying to reconcile the impossible. "You can't just stop. We depend on that money," she spat, voice tight with panic. "I know you've depended on it," I said softly, "for 8 years. And I've learned something important. I can't keep subsidizing a family that never valued me as a person." That conversation was brief, almost ritualistic, but it was a turning point. I felt something shift inside me, solid, unshakable. No guilt, no pleading, just clarity. If you've ever carried the weight of a family that treats you like an ATM, subscribe for strength. This is where boundaries become liberation. Later, I spread the old bank statements across the kitchen table, every transaction meticulously recorded with Marcus's help. My fingers hovered over each page, the memory of every late-night sacrifice pressing against my chest. I didn't do this to punish them. I did it to protect what mattered now. Me, Marcus, and the life we were building together. The next chapter would test them in ways I couldn't have imagined. But for the first time, I knew one thing. I was finally free to define what family meant for me. The morning of the wedding arrived clear and bright, the kind of Portland day that felt like it had been painted for beginnings. Sweet Dawn Bakery had transformed overnight. String lights glimmered above the outdoor canopy. White roses lined the tables. Autumn leaves scattered across the pathways added warmth and movement to the air. I worked quietly behind the counter, arranging the last of the custom pastries, smoothing icing on the lemon lavender wedding cake I'd baked myself. Each layer carried my grandmother's recipes, her patience, her stubborn love baked into the dough. Helen and Robert moved around me like anchors, adjusting chairs, carrying trays, helping every guest feel welcome. Marcus had been everywhere at once, shaking hands, making introductions, calming nervous friends, his presence steady, grounding. He caught my eye every now and then, and in those moments I felt what I had been missing all my life, being truly seen without expectation. Then the door chimed. My heart stopped for a moment. Mom, Dad, Clarissa. They stepped inside, dressed neatly, faces carefully composed. Not angry, not smiling, just tense. I could feel every customer's attention shift to them. Conversations paused. The Portland Monthly reporter who had come to cover the bakery peeked from a corner, phone in hand, recording. Mom strode forward, scanning the room, eyes fixed on me. "Athena," she said, voice carrying through the space, "we need to talk about family." I didn't flinch. Helen moved close. Robert stayed at my side. Marcus's hand found mine. My heart, which had been clenching for weeks in anticipation of this confrontation, felt steady for the first time. I knew exactly what I had to do. I took a deep breath, reached beneath the counter, and pulled out the folder I'd prepared weeks earlier. 8 years of transactions, documented meticulously, every transfer, every emergency, every dollar, $247,500. Mom's eyes widened. Clarissa's mouth fell open. My father froze. Silence filled the room. "You came here to ask for money," I said, calm and steady. "I'm showing you exactly what that looked like. And now, you will leave my bakery, and you will stop calling, texting, or showing up demanding anything from me." I placed my hand on my stomach, softly. "I'm pregnant. My child will never have to buy love or earn attention, and neither will I." For the first time, I felt entirely, utterly solid. If you've ever had to choose your peace over someone else's expectations, subscribe and stand for dignity. Sometimes defending your life quietly is louder than yelling. Helen hugged me. Marcus kissed my temple. And just like that, the people who had truly loved me all along, my chosen family, were right there, steady, unwavering, showing me what it meant to belong. The day after the wedding, Sweet Dawn Bakery felt different. There was a quiet, almost tangible weight lifted in the air. Guests had gone home, string lights still flickering gently, the scent of freshly baked bread and pastries lingering as though the shop itself was taking a deep breath. Marcus and I moved through the space together, tidying up, stacking boxes of leftover treats, and laughing quietly about small mishaps that happened during the ceremony. Spilled icing here, a crooked ribbon there. I paused at the counter, watching the sunlight spill across the display case, glinting off the glass like tiny affirmations. The folders containing 8 years of bank statements were tucked into my desk drawer, a reminder that the past was now safely recorded and contained. I didn't feel triumphant or vindictive. I felt steady, solid, unshakable. The peace, however, was short-lived. My phone buzzed with the familiar number, Mom. I hadn't expected her to call immediately, and honestly, I debated not answering. But curiosity and the ingrained sense of responsibility that had haunted me for decades won. I swiped to answer. "Athena, there's been a mistake with the bank," she began, voice tight and clipped, betraying a flicker of panic she tried desperately to mask. "The transfer didn't go through this month." I set the pastry tray aside, taking a deep breath. "I stopped the transfers," I said, calm but firm. "I'm not sending money anymore." Silence. I could almost picture her standing in her kitchen, frozen, trying to reconcile the impossible. "You can't just stop," she said sharply. "We depend on that money." 8 years flashed through my mind, $2,500 every month, often more. Emergencies that weren't emergencies. My dreams shelved, my life paused for their comfort. "I understand you've depended on it," I replied evenly. "I did too, for 8 years. But I can't continue subsidizing a family that doesn't value me as a person. Not anymore." The conversation ended with clipped words, her disbelief hanging like smoke in the line. I set the phone down and turned back to Marcus. He gave me a small nod, as if to say, "This is right." We spent the rest of the afternoon organizing orders for the week, the bakery humming back to life. Customers came in and out, stopping to congratulate us on the wedding or peek at the new seasonal treats. I noticed the way Helen and Robert moved effortlessly among them, asking about their favorite pastries, helping with boxes, offering warm smiles. They had shown up without expectation. They had witnessed my life, my joy, and they had done so without asking for anything in return. And for the first time I realized what family could really be. Not the people who demanded, took, or minimized, but the people who saw you, celebrated you, and were present consistently, without conditions. That evening, Marcus and I closed the bakery together, locking the doors with a sense of calm that I hadn't known in years. The warm glow from the string lights outside reflected in the windows, a quiet symbol that for once, We were the architects of our own life. I leaned against Marcus, inhaling the soft scent of baked dough and candles, and for the first time, I felt completely in control of my story. My parents' absence no longer felt like a wound. It felt like space to finally breathe, to build, and to live on my own terms. The first weeks after the wedding settled into a rhythm that felt strange but comforting. Sweet Dawn Bakery had become more than just a shop, it was a sanctuary. Regulars stopped by not only for cinnamon rolls or lavender shortbread, but for the warmth that filled the space, something Marcus, Helen, and Robert had helped me cultivate. Their presence reminded me, day after day, that family could be chosen and nurtured, not just inherited. Marcus and I spent evenings reviewing inventory, planning seasonal menus, and laughing at minor disasters that happened during service. One night, as we were kneading dough together, he said softly, "You know, you don't have to carry the weight of their expectations anymore." I nodded, pressing my forehead against his shoulder. For decades, I had believed that my role as the eldest meant responsibility and sacrifice, that love came with conditions and payment. Now, that weight was lifting, replaced by something steadier, clarity. But the relief was short-lived. 2 months after the wedding, Clarissa texted. The tone was casual, but the subtext was unmistakable. She had invested some family savings into a guaranteed opportunity. Brad had discovered some mix of cryptocurrency and multi-level marketing. It all went wrong. According to Aunt Susan, she lost nearly $80,000, money my parents had relied on to stay afloat. Without the safety net I had been providing for years, they were 3 months behind on the mortgage. I sank onto the bench outside the bakery, phone pressed to my ear as Aunt Susan explained everything. She spoke softly, but each word hit like a reminder. The world doesn't pause for your boundaries, even if they're justified. I should have felt vindicated, a cold satisfaction that karma had arrived, but I didn't. I felt tired, wary. My parents had always relied on me. Now, without the money, they were vulnerable, but that didn't change the past. It didn't undo the 8 years of being used, minimized, and undervalued. Instead, I shifted my focus. I pulled the spreadsheet Marcus and I had built from the drawer, reviewing every transfer, every date, every emergency. $247,500, meticulously recorded. This was no longer about anger. This was documentation. This was preparation. This was boundaries in action. I held the folder beside me as Marcus joined me on the bench, hand resting over mine. "Whatever comes next, we face it together," he said quietly. And for the first time, I believed it not just in words, but in my bones. I was not responsible for fixing their mistakes. I was responsible for protecting what mattered. My marriage, my bakery, and the life I was building with Marcus. Outside, the autumn light softened over Division Street, the warm glow reflecting off the bakery windows. Inside, the smell of cinnamon and butter lingered, a reminder that some things, hard work, love, care, could be real and lasting. I stood up, folder in hand, and walked inside to the warmth waiting for me. For the first time, I felt that I was truly home. It was a Saturday morning, the kind of crisp autumn day that made the air feel alive, and Sweet Dawn Bakery was buzzing. Regulars sipped coffee at the small tables near the window, chatting quietly, the smell of fresh pastries weaving through the air. I was behind the counter, carefully arranging boxes of lemon lavender shortbread, when the bell above the door chimed in a way that made my stomach tighten. I looked up. My mother, father, and Clarissa walked in, their presence immediately shifting the energy of the bakery. They moved as though the space belonged to them, ignoring the staff and customers who had been laughing just moments before. Mom's eyes locked on mine, calculating. Dad's hands were stuffed into his pockets, a nervous habit, and Clarissa followed behind, looking fragile but expectant. I placed the tray down and took a deep breath. Helen stepped closer, brushing my arm gently, a silent anchor. Robert stationed himself near the pastry case, his posture calm but alert. Marcus appeared at my side, giving my hand a reassuring squeeze. I felt steady, solid, ready. Mom spoke first. "Athena, we need to talk. This can't go on. You've cut us off completely. We need you to understand family is family. You can't just turn your back." I met her gaze, unflinching. "Family abandoned me long before I ever stopped giving. You came here today to ask for money, and I'm not giving. I've shown you what 8 years of my support looks like." With that, I pulled the folder from beneath the counter. 8 years of transfers, meticulously documented. Every date, every amount, every so-called emergency. $247,500. I spread the pages across the counter, keeping my voice calm but firm. Clarissa stepped forward, anger flashing in her eyes. You're making this about money. It's about love, Athena. You're being selfish. I nodded slowly. Then tell me, Clarissa, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for something? Not to notify me of some emergency, just to talk? She froze. Silence. My mother's face hardened, the old defensive mask she always wore, but the evidence on the table spoke louder than any excuses. I continued, my hand resting lightly on my stomach. This, I said, is what I'm protecting now. My child, my marriage, my life. I am not abandoning anyone. I am finally choosing what and who matters. Mom's voice shook slightly, not with sorrow, but with a flicker of recognition and humiliation. You're cutting us off? Yes, I said. The transfers are over. The daily, monthly, yearly sacrifice has ended. You've had your chance and I've had mine. We are done with transactions disguised as love. For the first time I saw the shift. Clarissa's mouth opened, closed. She looked at the evidence, then at me, and finally, at Marcus. Dad didn't speak, as if the folder alone was a mirror he couldn't bear. The customers around us watched silently, the hum of the bakery momentarily stilled. Even the Portland Monthly reporter in the corner lowered her phone, waiting. Helen stepped closer, hand on my back. Robert's calm presence flanked the other side. Marcus squeezed my hand. I felt the weight of years lift, not because they were punished, but because the truth was finally visible. I hadn't had to raise my voice, shout, or threaten. The facts did it for me. Mom grabbed Dad's arm, pulling them toward the door. We don't need to be humiliated by strangers, she said, voice sharp. But there was no dignity left in it. Clarissa lingered a moment, confusion flickering across her face, then turned and followed. The bell chimed as the door closed behind them. Silence fell for a moment in the bakery. Then the customers returned to their conversations. I gathered the papers, returning them to the folder, and felt a strange calm settle over me. I was no longer invisible. I was no longer responsible for fixing a family that had never shown up. Helen hugged me, whispering, "You're not losing anything today. You're gaining everything you deserve." Marcus kissed my temple. I looked around the bakery, the warm light, the bustling customers, the people who truly cared, and realized that this was my family now, not by blood, but by choice, by presence, by love. And for the first time in decades, I felt completely, undeniably free. The days after that confrontation felt surreal. Sweet Dawn Bakery was alive with the energy of people who genuinely cared, yet every time the memory of my parents and Clarissa crossing the threshold replayed in my mind, I felt a mixture of exhaustion and liberation. For 32 years, I had been training myself to absorb disappointment, to hope against reason, and to shoulder the weight of a family that only saw me as a source of support. Now, that weight had lifted. Orders came in steadily, and I realized that the bakery was more than a business. It was a statement. Each cinnamon roll, each lavender shortbread, each carefully piped layer of a cake carried proof that my life could be built on my terms, that I could create without someone else taking ownership. Customers smiled, thanked me by name, shared stories about birthdays and anniversaries. For the first time, I was celebrated for what I gave, and for who I was without conditions. Marcus noticed the change in me more than anyone. One evening, as we were closing up, he leaned against the counter, eyes gentle. "You're lighter," he said. "I can see it in the way you move, the way you smile. You've been carrying too much for too long." I nodded, feeling the truth of his words. I had. But for the first time, I wasn't carrying it for anyone else's approval. Then came the news that Clarissa and Brad's investments had collapsed entirely. Aunt Susan called me first, her tone cautious but relieved that I wasn't going to intervene. "They've lost almost everything," she said. "The house, the savings, they're desperate." I listened, but there was no thrill in it, no vindication. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt the same steady, careful awareness I had felt since canceling the transfers. They had made their choices and now they had to live with them. Inside the bakery, I arranged a display of autumn pies, the colors of pumpkin, apple, and pecan, reflecting the turning season outside. I thought about the years I had sacrificed, the nights spent working extra shifts, the countless dollars that had flown out of my account. That sacrifice had shaped me, yes, but it had also taught me boundaries, resilience, and the value of choosing who to give my love and attention to. When Lily was born in April, that understanding deepened. Tiny fists, a perfect little heartbeat, soft brown eyes that reflected her father's calm patience, and yes, my stubborn chin. She had arrived in a world where her mother could finally model love without calculation. Marcus and I watched her, astonished by the gravity of life and love that required nothing in return. I kept a small folder beside her crib, bank statements, the deed to Sweet Dawn, and a letter I had written to myself. It was proof that endings could be beginnings, that boundaries could save you, and that chosen family could be as real, or even more real, than blood. Even when my parents tried to email me, to reach out, to manipulate the narrative, I didn't respond. I allowed the silence to protect me, and slowly, the rhythm of our lives settled into a new normal. My bakery thrived. Our home was warm, filled with laughter, the smells of baking, and the comfort of people who truly showed up. I had learned something fundamental. Home isn't always where you come from. Sometimes it's where you decide to stay. By mid-May, Sweet Dawn Bakery had grown into more than I ever imagined. The Portland Monthly feature had brought an unexpected rush of customers, and every day, I marveled at how full the shop had become. People chatted over coffee, children pointed excitedly at cupcakes, and regulars shared stories like we were part of one big, chosen family. Marcus and I worked side by side, coordinating orders, training two new part-time staff, Mia, a young culinary school graduate with an endless supply of energy, and Devin, a single dad who brought a quiet steadiness to the kitchen. For the first time, I experienced the rhythm of giving and receiving in a way that didn't leave me depleted. Each compliment on a pastry, every return visit from someone who had tasted our cinnamon rolls, was a gentle reminder that the world responded differently when generosity wasn't coerced. I began to understand that the love I had been chasing from my parents could manifest in other ways through presence, care, and acknowledgement. Evening light filtered through the bakery windows as I balanced the books and prepared invoices. I glanced at the folder of past bank statements, still tucked safely in my drawer, and smiled faintly. That chapter of my life, decades of sending money, sacrificing for a family that never reciprocated, was closed. It had taught me lessons, yes, but it was not my present or my future. That week, news came from Aunt Susan. Clarissa had moved back in with Mom and Dad after her failed investments, and Brad had relocated to Seattle. I felt no satisfaction, only a quiet sense of inevitability. They had made their choices. I had made mine. And mine had led to this, a bakery, a husband who truly saw me, and a life built on clarity and respect. One rainy afternoon, as I wiped down the counter and stacked boxes for delivery, I felt a flutter of life inside me. 2 pink lines on a test lily, our baby, already growing inside me. Marcus held me close, spinning me gently, both of us laughing and crying at the same time. For the first time, I felt the gravity of nurturing a life that wouldn't have to negotiate love or prove worth. My child would inherit none of the guilt or conditional affection I had endured. Helen and Robert were beside us, tears in their eyes, sharing in the joy with genuine delight. Their support was quiet but complete, filling every space my parents' absence had left empty. I realized then that family wasn't defined by blood. It was defined by consistent care, presence, and love that was freely given. That night, rocking Lily to sleep, I promised silently that she would never feel the pressure to earn love or attention. She would know she was enough simply because she existed. Marcus rested beside me, hand on mine, both of us aware that we were building something solid rooted not in obligation or fear, but in choice. The bakery's hum faded into the evening, the soft glow of lights casting warmth across the walls. I realized I had learned to thrive in the space my parents never made for me. Every cinnamon-scented breath, every satisfied smile from a customer, and every quiet moment with Marcus and Lily reinforced the truth I had discovered. Love and family could exist without debt, without guilt, and without sacrifice that diminished your soul. It was a gray Wednesday morning, the kind where rain streaked the bakery windows and the scent of wet pavement mixed with the warm aroma of fresh bread. I was arranging boxes of pastries for an early morning delivery when my phone buzzed. The name on the screen made my stomach clench. Mom. I hesitated, inhaling deeply. 8 months had passed since I stopped sending money. 8 months of silence, of building a life that belonged. My first instinct was to ignore it. But the ingrained sense of responsibility, the same one that had made me an ATM for years, wavered for a fraction of a second. I swiped to answer. Athena, her voice was tighter than usual, clipped and tense. We need to talk. There's been trouble. Clarissa, her investments, she's lost almost everything. And now, well, the mortgage, everything. We were hoping you could help. I set the pastry tray down and breathed. I didn't respond immediately. I knew the patterns. I knew the guilt that would follow, the pressure to fix, to send, to absorb yet again. Marcus stood silently at my side, eyes steady, hand resting lightly on mine. I'm listening, I said finally. But I need the facts, nothing else. Aunt Susan later filled in the gaps. Clarissa had convinced Mom and Dad to invest the family's savings in a high-risk scheme Brad had discovered. A Ponzi setup. $80,000 gone. They had relied on the cushion I'd provided for years. Now it was gone. Their panic was almost predictable. I didn't feel joy or satisfaction. There was no gloating. I felt steady, aware, protective of what mattered most: our life, our bakery, our child. I spread the old spreadsheet across the kitchen table, Marcus beside me. Every transfer, every emergency, every dollar carefully documented. $247,500 over 8 years. Every act of giving had been recorded, not for revenge, not for proof of rightness, but to keep clarity in a world that had never offered it. We reviewed the numbers, confirmed every date, and laid the groundwork for what could come. If they approached, I would be ready. Not angry, not defensive, just precise. No manipulation, no pleading. My boundaries were no longer negotiable. Later that day, I moved among the bakery, carrying boxes, greeting customers, the sounds and smells of flour and sugar grounding me. Marcus carried Lily in the carrier, her soft coos mingling with the warmth around us. For the first time, I truly understood what it meant to be protected not by birth but by choice. My parents had tried to define my worth with money and obedience for decades. Now I was defining it with clarity, dignity, and love that was freely given. Every customer smile, every helping hand from Helen or Robert, every quiet moment with Marcus and Lily reminded me, family is who shows up, consistently and unconditionally, not who demands and takes. I realized that the space I had fought for, built brick by brick and pastry by pastry, was no longer just my business, it was my life. And this life, finally, belonged to me. It was a Saturday when I saw them walk in. The bell above Sweet Dawn Bakery jingled, and my heart clenched as Mom, Dad, and Clarissa stepped inside, their presence filling the space like a storm rolling in. Customers paused mid-conversation, cups halfway to their lips. I felt Marcus shift beside me, his hand brushing against mine, a quiet anchor as I straightened behind the counter. Mom's eyes locked on mine immediately. "Athena," she said, voice tight, trying to sound calm but failing. "We need to talk about this. You can't just shut us out." I remained still, measuring my words carefully. "I'm listening," I said, spreading the folder of bank statements across the counter, the one Marcus and I had compiled meticulously over 8 years. Every $2,500 transfer, every emergency payment, every unexpected gift, $247,500. The evidence was clear, irrefutable. Clarissa's jaw tightened, her voice trembling with disbelief. "You're making this about money. It's about love." I leaned slightly forward, eyes steady. "Then tell me, Clarissa, when was the last time you called me just to see how I was doing? Not to ask for money, not to notify me of an emergency, just to talk?" Silence. The kind of silence that stretches and pulls at the air. My mother's face hardened, but the numbers on the counter were louder than any words she could muster. I placed my hand gently on my stomach, the soft curve of Lily reminding me of why I had drawn these boundaries. "I am protecting what matters now, my child, my marriage, and the life Marcus and I are building. This is not about revenge, it is about survival." Dad finally spoke, his voice low, almost pleading. "Athena, we've made mistakes. Mistakes aren't irreparable. Come home, let's talk." I shook my head. The family that abandoned me is not a family I can return to on someone else's terms. I am not responsible for fixing what has been broken for decades. The time for silence and sacrifice is over. Helen stepped beside me, her hand resting gently on my shoulder, and Robert mirrored her on the other side. Marcus squeezed my hand. I felt the weight of decades lift, replaced by a solidity I had never known. Mom's voice cracked, but not with sadness, more with the realization that the past could no longer be rewritten. You're cutting us off completely? Yes, I said, calm. The transfers are over. The daily, monthly, yearly obligations have ended. We are done with transactions disguised as love. Clarissa hesitated, confusion flickering across her face, before finally looking at Marcus, Helen, and Robert. My parents stood frozen, confronted with the facts, their own decisions reflected back at them in cold print. Mom grabbed Dad's arm and began pulling them toward the door. We don't need to be humiliated by strangers, she spat. Clarissa lingered, eyes darting between the folder and me, before finally following. The bell jingled as they left. The room exhaled. Customers whispered, then returned to their conversations. Helen hugged me. Marcus kissed my temple. Robert gave me a nod. For the first time, in 32 years, I felt fully, undeniably free. My chosen family, those who had shown up, consistently, with love, were standing beside me, and I finally understood what it truly meant to belong. After the confrontation at Sweet Dawn Bakery, a quiet settled over my life in a way I hadn't expected. The tension that had hung over me for decades didn't vanish entirely, but it no longer dictated my days. Customers returned in steady streams, bringing laughter, conversations, and stories. Children pointed excitedly at cupcakes, while adults lingered over coffee and cinnamon rolls, sharing small victories and little joys. I began to realize that the bakery itself had become a sanctuary not just for me, but for everyone who walked through the doors. Marcus and I settled into a routine that felt natural, grounded, and surprisingly light. Mornings began with baking schedules and inventory checks, followed by small doses of chaos, as deliveries were packed and customers lined up outside. Evenings were spent side by side in the kitchen, kneading dough, frosting cakes, or experimenting with new recipes. Mia and Devin had become indispensable, their laughter and skill bringing a vibrancy to the shop that reminded me what it meant to work with people who genuinely cared. One afternoon I stood behind the counter, watching Marcus carry Lily in her carrier. She was softly cooing, her little hands curling around his fingers. It struck me then, this was the family I had chosen. Not the one that had demanded and taken, not the one that had dictated my worth with money or presents, but the one that showed up, consistently, without expectation or calculation. The lessons of the past months, years even, became clearer with each passing day. I no longer measured my value by what I could provide for others, or by how compliant I had been. My boundaries, once a source of fear and guilt, had become a shield. Each day I honored them. I felt a little lighter, a little freer. It was a slow process, the kind that didn't announce itself with fireworks, but rather settled quietly in the corners of my life, unshakable and steady. Then came the unexpected moment that shifted everything yet again, Lily's first smile. One morning, as I leaned over her crib, she reached out and grinned, her small mouth curving into a perfect expression of trust and recognition. I felt tears well in my eyes, not because I had achieved some grand victory, but because I finally understood the magnitude of love without conditions. This tiny human depended on me in the simplest, purest way, and I realized I could give her a life free from the conditional affection I had endured. Sweet Dawn continued to thrive. Orders doubled, then tripled. I began experimenting with online sales, shipping Grandma Ruth's cinnamon rolls across the country. Each success reinforced a truth I had learned painfully over the years. I was capable, resilient, and deserving of recognition not because I had sacrificed for others, but because I had remained true to myself. Even when my parents attempted to email me, carefully phrasing their attempts at reconciliation or subtle guilt-tripping, I didn't respond. I recognized their patterns now, saw the familiar manipulations and half-truths, and chose to protect the life I had painstakingly built. Peace was not silence. It was control over what I allowed into my world. That evening, as Marcus held Lily and I wiped down counters, I looked around Sweet Dawn. The warm glow of string lights, the aroma of baking, and the presence of those who truly cared created a sanctuary I had never known. I felt the weight of 32 years of invisible labor lift, replaced by something steadier, clarity, dignity, and a sense of belonging that I had finally earned. For the first time, I understood what it meant to have a home not dictated by expectation or obligation, but by choice, care, and love freely given. Sweet Dawn was not just a bakery, it was a testament to survival, to self-respect, and to the family I had built with my own hands. Brick by brick, pastry by pastry, I had created a life that belonged entirely to me. Weeks turned into months, and Sweet Dawn Bakery became more than just a business. It became a rhythm of life, a pulse that reminded me daily of what mattered most. Each morning, Marcus and I arrived before sunrise, the city quiet, the scent of freshly baked bread filling the air as we prepped for the day. The warmth of the ovens, the smooth counter surfaces, and the laughter of Mia and Devon in the back kitchen were constant reminders that this was our space, our sanctuary. Lily grew rapidly, and every milestone she reached felt like a soft confirmation that the life Marcus and I were building was rooted in love, not obligation. Her small hands curling around mine, her coos, her first attempts at standing each moment reinforced that family could be chosen, nurtured, and unwavering, even when blood relatives had failed to show up. The community around Sweet Dawn Bakery began to notice more than just the pastries. Regulars brought friends, praising not only the cinnamon rolls but the warmth, the care, the way we remembered names and stories. People lingered longer, conversations flowed, and the shop became a hub where everyone felt welcome. In those moments I realized that this was what had been missing all along: reciprocity. I gave freely, and it was returned not always in currency, but in acknowledgement, connection, and respect. Despite the peace we had cultivated, the shadow of my parents' absence lingered in small ways. Occasionally, I would catch myself imagining the confrontation, the looks on their faces as they saw the evidence of what I had given over 8 years. But the feeling wasn't satisfaction, it was clarity. I had spent too long trying to earn love that could never be bought. Now, my energy was devoted to things that mattered, to people who mattered, to a future I could shape without interference. One late afternoon, as the bakery quieted down, Marcus found me sitting at a corner table, Lily asleep in her carrier. I traced the letters on the old bank statements, thinking about the sacrifices I had made and how far I had come. "You know," he said softly, "you didn't just survive. You built something incredible despite everything." I looked at him, letting the truth of his words sink in. Survival had been the first step. Building a life worth protecting was the second. And finally, I was doing it on my own terms. The emails from my mother continued, sporadic and polite on the surface, but heavy with subtext. I didn't respond. Every time I thought about replying, I reminded myself of Lily, of Marcus, of the bakery, and of all the small, steady victories that had led me here. Silence, I realized, was not avoidance, it was protection. Boundaries, I now understood, were an act of love for oneself, not cruelty to others. By the end of that week, I had baked over 200 pastries, filled custom orders, and watched as customers left with smiles that felt like genuine gratitude. I carried Lily in the carrier as I organized boxes for shipping, the rhythm of the bakery echoing the rhythm of our life, steady, intentional, warm. And in that quiet hum of ovens and conversation, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades: belonging. Not forced, not earned through money or sacrifice, but real, chosen, and present. My parents' absence no longer defined me. What defined me now was this: the life Marcus, Lily, and I were building together, grounded in love, respect, and freedom. Motherhood arrived quietly, in the early hours of an April morning, with Lily's tiny fingers curling around mine as if she already knew she was safe. I had imagined this moment countless times, but nothing could have prepared me for the weight of responsibility, the tenderness, or the unfiltered joy. Holding her, I realized that everything I had endured, the endless obligations, the invisible labor, the years of trying to earn love had led me here, to a place where I could give freely and be celebrated for simply existing. Marcus hovered nearby, gentle and steady, as I fed her and whispered soft nonsense words, coaxing a small smile. His calm presence was a reminder that family could be chosen, nurtured, and unwavering. No conditions, no expectations, just love. I watched Lily's chest rise and fall with each breath, feeling a clarity I hadn't known since childhood. This child would never have to negotiate her worth. She would never be compared or measured by the demands of others. Sweet Dawn Bakery thrived around us, each day punctuated by the comforting rhythm of ovens, laughter, and customer chatter. Mia and Devon had grown into their roles seamlessly, helping the bakery feel alive without adding stress. I noticed the subtle joy in watching a child's face light up over a perfectly frosted cupcake or hearing a regular compliment, a carefully arranged display. For the first time, I realized that giving could feel light instead of draining. It didn't have to be transactional. Being a mother also forced me to examine my own boundaries more carefully. Every decision, how much time to devote to the bakery, when to rest, how to protect Lily from the patterns I had grown up with, was deliberate. Marcus and I talked late into the evenings, weighing options, setting rules, and making space for both work and life. It was exhausting at times, but it was the first exhaustion that felt meaningful. I started documenting routines, recipes, and milestones in a small notebook, a keepsake for Lily, but also a reminder for myself of how far we had come. I reflected on the contrast between the family I had been born into and the one I had built. My parents had measured love in money and obedience. Our chosen family measured it in presence, care, and attention. It was a lesson I intended to pass on. One afternoon, Marcus caught me staring at Lily as she napped in her carrier. "You're glowing," he said softly. "Not just because you're happy, but because you're whole." I smiled, letting the warmth of the bakery and our little family settle into me. For the first time, I believed it. The balance between motherhood and running Sweet Dawn Bakery was delicate. Every day was a negotiation of energy, patience, and focus. But every evening, when the lights dimmed, the ovens cooled, and I held Lily against my chest, I knew I had built something indestructible. A home, a life, a family defined not by obligation, but by choice and love. And for the first time in 32 years, I felt completely at peace with that truth. By the following spring, Sweet Dawn Bakery had become a recognized part of the Portland community. A feature in Portland Monthly highlighted not just the pastries, but the warmth of the shop, the way customers were greeted by name, and the care put into every creation. People came for the cinnamon rolls and lavender shortbread, but they stayed for the feeling of being seen, welcomed, and valued. Standing behind the counter one morning, Marcus holding Lily in the carrier, I realized how different life felt from the one I had imagined as a child. I no longer measured my worth by compliance or financial sacrifice. My parents' absence no longer haunted me, it was a boundary I had firmly set. I had chosen a family that showed up, day after day, without expectation, without judgment. The contrast between my childhood and now was stark. Back then, love had been conditional, tied to money, effort, and unspoken rules. Now, it was present in every gentle word from Helen, every laugh with Mia and Devon, every coo and smile from Lily. The bakery, our life, and our little chosen family reflected what I had always longed for: care, respect, and freedom to simply be myself. For the first time, I could see clearly. I was not just surviving, I was thriving. Summer arrived, and with it, a new rhythm settled over Sweet Dawn Bakery. Orders flowed steadily, online shipments increased, and the shop was filled with the steady hum of conversation and the aroma of fresh pastries. Marcus and I moved seamlessly through the days, balancing bakery tasks with parenting, learning to read Lily's cues while keeping the shop running. One evening, as I closed the bakery and carried Lily in her carrier, I paused to look at the display cases still glowing in the fading sunlight. Every tray of pastries, every neatly wrapped box ready for delivery, felt like proof of what we had built from scratch. I thought about the years I had spent giving endlessly to a family that never valued me. Back then, I had believed that love had to be earned through sacrifice. Now I knew better. Helen and Robert remained steady fixtures in our lives, showing up without expectation, offering advice, encouragement, and quiet support. Marcus's calm steadiness, combined with their presence, created a foundation I had never experienced in my own family. As Lily stirred in the carrier, reaching up to touch my face, I realized the full scope of what we had achieved. We had built a home, a family, and a life rooted in care, love, and boundaries. For the first time, I felt truly untethered, thriving, and at peace. Autumn settled over Portland, painting the streets golden, and Sweet Dawn Bakery hummed with life. Customers lingered over pastries, laughing and sharing stories, unaware of the quiet triumph behind the counter. Marcus carried Lily on his hip, her small fingers curling around his thumb as I arranged trays of cinnamon rolls and lavender shortbread. I paused, looking around the bakery, taking in the warmth of the shop, the steady presence of Helen and Robert helping without fanfare, and the calm focus of Mia and Devon in the kitchen. This was the life I had built, rooted in love, respect, and boundaries. For the first time, I realized that the absence of my parents no longer left a void. Their choices no longer dictated my sense of worth. In their place, I had created a family that truly saw me, and a life where love was given freely and received without calculation. I smiled down at Lily, feeling the weight of the past finally lift. This was peace. This was home. Winter arrived quietly, dusting Portland with frost, and Sweet Dawn Bakery glowed warmly against the cold. Lily slept peacefully in her carrier as Marcus arranged pastries for the morning rush. I stood behind the counter, watching the shop come alive with laughter, conversation, and the smell of fresh bread. For the first time, I felt the fullness of a life built on choice, care, and love freely given. My parents' absence no longer haunted me. I had created a family and a home that truly mattered, and every day, it thrived. If this story resonates, subscribe and stand for dignity. You deserve to witness and protect your own worth.